In Cedar Grove, a town where the rustle of autumn leaves was louder than the traffic, Jack Morrison owned exactly two things of value: his 8-year-old daughter, Emma, and the bicycle that carried him between his 3 jobs, a ghost of a machine held together by hope and well-oiled chains. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, he saw her, a woman in clothes that cost more than his monthly rent, stranded beside a car that looked like it had been sculpted from a block of midnight. Her heel was broken. Her face was a mask of elegant frustration. Without a second thought, he offered her his bike, his only way home, his only way to his next job, his only way to make ends meet. He didn't know her name was Alexandra Kent. He didn't know she was a billionaire, an heiress to an empire that devoured towns like Cedar Grove for breakfast. And he had no idea that by handing her his bicycle, he wasn't just giving her a ride. He was handing her the weapon that would be used to destroy his entire life. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, have you ever trusted a stranger and had it change your life? And if this story grabs you, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because what's coming next is something you won't want to miss. The alarm shrieked at 4:30 a.m. Jack's hand shot out and silenced it before the noise could slither down the hall to Emma's room. In the pre-dawn gloom of their tiny apartment, he moved like a phantom, a man who had long ago memorized the symphony of creaking floorboards. 5 years. 5 years since Sarah was gone. 5 years of this silent dance. The coffee maker gurgled, a lonely sound in the quiet kitchen. He packed Emma's lunch, a peanut butter sandwich, a bruised apple, and a single cookie saved from his own meager dinner last night. He laid out her clothes, the purple sweater with the small, expertly darned hole at the elbow. He checked her homework, signed a permission slip for a field trip he wasn't sure he could afford, and placed it all in her backpack. Each task was a prayer, a promise whispered to a ghost. "I'm taking care of her, Sarah. I'm trying." In the mirror, his janitor's uniform hung on a frame that was too young for the gray already salting his temples. 34 felt like 50. By mid-morning, he'd trade the janitor's gray for the hardware store's bright red apron. By evening, he'd be wearing the pizza place's logo, the smell of pepperoni clinging to him until he showered it away just before midnight. The bike was everything. It was the bridge between his 3 lives, the machine that turned time into money and money into food on the table. It had been Sarah's last gift to him, a wedding anniversary present from a lifetime ago. "To save the planet, Jack," she'd laughed, her eyes bright with a future they'd never get to see. Now, it was just saving him. At 6:15, a small voice called from down the hall. "Daddy?" "In the kitchen, sunshine," he called back, his heart doing its familiar flip. She sounded so much like her mother in the mornings. Emma padded in, clutching a one-eyed stuffed rabbit named Mr. Flopsy. Her eyes, sharp and observant, took in the world with a scientist's precision. "You look tired, Daddy." He forced a smile, ruffling her messy brown curls. "Just dreaming of all the pizza I get to deliver tonight." "Can we get the extra cheese one on Friday?" she asked, her voice small. "We'll see, sweetie. We'll see." The walk to the bike rack was their sacred time. He rolled the bike, its frame scarred with the memories of 1,000 journeys, while Emma skipped beside him, her non-stop chatter filling the crisp morning air. She was explaining her latest science project hypothesis, something about whether music could make beans grow faster. "I think they'll like jazz," she declared. "It's complicated but soothing, like you." He stopped, his heart aching with a love so fierce it was a physical pain. He crouched down to look her in the eye. "You, Emma Morrison, are going to change the world one day." "I know," she said, with the simple confidence only a child can possess. "But first, I have to finish 3rd grade." At the school gates, she hugged him tight. "Love you, Daddy. Don't forget to eat your sandwich." "Love you too, sunshine." He watched her disappear into the building, a small figure in a worn purple sweater, carrying the weight of his world on her tiny shoulders. He swung his leg over the bike, the familiar motion a comfort. The chain hummed, a loyal and steady sound. He had no idea that just a few miles away, a woman had just stepped off a train, a woman who saw the world not as a place of love and connection, but as a series of assets to be liquidated, and she was heading straight for him. Alexandra Kent felt the eyes of the other passengers on the train like insects crawling on her skin. She was used to being looked at, but not like this. Not with the raw curiosity reserved for a creature outside its natural habitat. Her Louboutin heels, the color of dried blood, seemed to scream their price tag against the train's worn, grimy carpet. In her Hermès bag, nestled next to a phone that was buzzing itself to death with frantic calls from her father, lay a folder. It was thin, unassuming, and contained enough power to extinguish the livelihoods of 250 families. The Stewart Manufacturing acquisition, her masterpiece, her father's voice from yesterday's board meeting echoed in her head. Excellent strategy, Alexandra. Ruthless, efficient. You've inherited my best qualities. Ruthless. The word had felt like a coronation yesterday. Today it felt like an epitaph. The plan was perfect. Buy the family-owned company in Vermont. Strip it for its assets. Sell the land. Dissolve the pension fund. The projections showed a 40% profit within 6 months. It was a beautiful, elegant, and utterly merciless piece of financial engineering. She had created it. And on Monday, she was supposed to execute it. Instead, she'd walked out of her Manhattan penthouse, leaving a note as cold and brief as a market report, powered off her phone, and bought a one-way ticket to the only place she could think of that her father's empire hadn't yet touched. Cedar Grove, her grandmother's cottage, a place of chipped teacups, overgrown gardens, and maddeningly simple philosophies. A legacy isn't a stock portfolio, Alexandra, her grandmother used to say. It's the lives you've touched for the better. Alexandra had always considered that sentimental nonsense. Now, she wasn't so sure. The train pulled into the sleepy Cedar Grove station. The air smelled different here. It smelled of damp earth and wood smoke, not exhaust fumes and ambition. She started walking, her expensive luggage bumping awkwardly along the cracked sidewalk. The cottage was 2 miles away. She was an alien here, a predator in a nature preserve. The very clothes on her back were a testament to a world built on the destruction of places like this. And then it happened. A sharp crack echoed in the quiet evening. Her heel snapped. She stumbled, catching herself on a weathered fence post, her ankle twisting painfully. Perfect. Utterly, laughably perfect. Stranded. A mile from her destination. Her phone a dead weight in her bag. The sun was setting, casting long, menacing shadows down the empty street. For the first time in her adult life, Alexandra Kent had a problem she couldn't solve with a phone call or a wire transfer. She was completely and utterly helpless. And that was when she heard it, the gentle whir of bicycle wheels and a child's bright, clear voice. Jack saw the woman's predicament from a block away. Designer suit, broken shoe, a constellation of expensive shopping bags at her feet. She looked like a bird of paradise that had taken a wrong turn and ended up in a sparrow's nest. Everything about her screamed out of place. But it was the look in her eyes that made him stop, a flash of vulnerability, of genuine fear, that cut through the expensive facade. It was a look he recognized. He saw it in his own mirror some mornings. "Daddy, look!" Emma's voice, full of innocent concern. "That lady's hurt." He walked the bike closer, Emma trailing him. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Alexandra's cheeks flushed. She was used to being in control, to being the one people deferred to. This raw, unsolicited kindness felt foreign, almost suspicious. "I'm fine. Just wardrobe malfunction." Emma, ever the scientist, peered at the broken heel. "That's a very pointy shoe. It's not designed for this terrain. Bad engineering." A small smile touched Alexandra's lips. "You're not wrong." Jack looked at the setting sun, then at her shopping bags, then at her pained expression. He did the quick mental math of a man who solved a dozen logistical problems before breakfast. His pizza delivery shift started in 45 minutes. The restaurant was on the other side of town, but Emma was watching him, and Sarah's voice was a whisper in his memory. Kindness costs nothing, Jack. Look, he said, the decision made. Take my bike. It's not much, but it'll get you where you need to go. Alexandra blinked. Oh no, I couldn't possibly. The basket is perfect for groceries, Emma chirped, already rearranging the bags. Daddy says it's magic. It always has room for one more thing. He was giving her his lifeline, the machine that powered their entire existence. He didn't know her, had no reason to trust her, but Emma was watching, her wide, serious eyes judging his character. Please, he insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. Just bring it back when you're done. We're at Cedarview Apartments 4B. I'm Jack Morrison. This is Emma. The bean scientist, Emma added proudly. Alexandra hesitated, a war raging inside her. In her world, nothing was free. Every favor had a price, every gift a hidden ledger. This simple, unconditional generosity was something she didn't understand. It was a language she'd never learned, but her ankle throbbed and the sky was growing darker. Alexandra, she said, carefully omitting her last name. I'm staying at my grandmother's cottage on Maple Street. He helped her onto the bike, his hand steadying the handlebars. His touch was warm, calloused, real. It felt more solid than anything she had experienced in years. The old Kent place, he said, the name a casual observation to him, a thunderclap to her. Nice spot. Heard the garden's gone wild, though. Plants just need love, Emma said sagely, and maybe some jazz music. As Alexandra pedaled away, the old bike surprisingly smooth and sturdy, she heard Jack's voice behind her. You know, that bike, it was my wife's. It's the most important thing I own, besides Emma. The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. She almost crashed. He hadn't just given a stranger a ride. He had trusted her with a piece of his heart, a relic of a love he had lost. And she, Alexandra Kent, a woman who professionally shattered legacies for a living, was riding away on it. The cottage was just as she remembered, dusty, silent, and full of ghosts. Alexandra unpacked her groceries, her hands shaking slightly. The bike leaned against the porch railing, a silent accusation. She had his wife's bicycle. The thought was a stone in her gut. She spent a restless night on a lumpy mattress, the silence of Cedar Grove a roaring in her ears. In Manhattan, the city's hum was a constant lullaby of ambition. Here, the quiet forced her to listen to the chaos inside her own head. The next morning, she found it, tucked away in her grandmother's desk, an old leather-bound ledger. It wasn't a diary. It was a record, decades of small, anonymous donations, school supplies for a family who couldn't afford them, a check to the town diner to cover the meals of the unemployed, a grant to the library. Her grandmother, Margaret Kent, had been quietly weaving a web of support through this town for 50 years. It wasn't charity, it was investment, not in stocks, but in people. And then she saw the name. Morrison. Emergency furnace repair. December 2003. Jack's family. Her grandmother had helped them years ago. The coincidence was too sharp, too pointed. It felt like a message from the grave. She cleaned the bike until it shone, then walked it back to the Cedarview Apartments. It was a shabby, run-down building, but the flower boxes on the balconies overflowed with cheerful marigolds. Someone cared here. She knocked on the door of 4B. Emma answered, her face lighting up. You brought it back. See, Daddy? I told you she was nice. Jack appeared behind her, his expression guarded. He looked tired. Thank you, Alexandra said, her voice sounding thin and strange to her own ears. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. It's just a bike, he said, but his eyes told her it was a lie. I know what it is, she said softly. You told me. It was your wife's. His guard dropped, just for a second, replaced by a raw, aching grief. Yeah, it was. An old woman emerged from the apartment next door, a plate of steaming dumplings in her hand. "Morrison! I made too much again. Emma, you come get these before they get cold." Her eyes, sharp as needles, landed on Alexandra. They were shrewd, knowing eyes. "And you must be Margaret's granddaughter. I'm Mrs. Chen. I knew your grandmother very well. She was a good woman. She understood the value of things." The emphasis on the word things was unmistakable. Mrs. Chen wasn't just a friendly neighbor. She was a gatekeeper, a historian, and she knew exactly who Alexandra was. The world seemed to shrink around Alexandra, the ghost of her grandmother in the ledger, the knowing eyes of the old woman next door, Jack's quiet, devastating sacrifice. This wasn't a random town she had escaped to. It was a place she was tied to, in ways she was only just beginning to understand. "Well," Mrs. Chen said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, "are you going to be a blessing to this town, like your grandmother was? Or a curse, like your father?" The question hung in the air, sharp and deadly as a shard of glass. Emma, oblivious, looked from Alexandra to Jack. "Can Alexandra stay for dumplings, Daddy? Please?" Jack looked at Alexandra, his eyes full of questions he didn't know how to ask. He was a simple man caught in something incredibly complicated. He saw a beautiful, mysterious woman. He saw his daughter's hopeful face. He didn't see the folder in her designer bag, the one with the plan to gut a town just like this one. He didn't know that her family's business was built on the ashes of communities like Cedar Grove. He didn't know that by inviting her in for dumplings, he was inviting the fox into the henhouse. "Sure," he said, forcing a smile. "There's always room for one more." The dumplings were a revelation, simple, perfect, and made with an ingredient Alexandra's personal chefs had never managed to master: love. She sat in Jack's tiny, cluttered kitchen, a world away from her sterile Manhattan penthouse, and felt something shift inside her. It felt dangerously like belonging. Over the next few weeks, Alexandra began to build a life, or at least a convincing imitation of one. She rented a small, furnished apartment on the other side of town, telling Jack and Emma it was more practical than the dusty old cottage. She volunteered at the school library, shelving books and helping kids with their homework. She started working in her grandmother's overgrown garden, finding a strange satisfaction in wrestling with weeds and dirt. She was playing a role, the prodigal granddaughter, rediscovering her roots. But the lines were starting to blur. The easy laughter she shared with Jack over coffee at the town diner felt real. The pride she felt watching Emma win an honorable mention at the science fair for her bean project was genuine. The ache in her chest when Jack spoke about Sarah, his voice thick with love and loss, was her own. She kept the folder, her grim souvenir from her old life, hidden at the bottom of a trunk. It was a constant, tangible reminder of who she was or who she was supposed to be. Kent Industries. The name felt like a curse. One afternoon at the hardware store, she saw it firsthand. Jack was patiently explaining the difference between two types of wood stain to an elderly customer. His boss, a harried-looking man named Mr. Henderson, was on the phone, his face pale. "No, I understand," Henderson was saying, his voice tight. "A buyout offer, from a subsidiary of Kent Industries. I see. No, I haven't told my employees yet." Alexandra froze, hidden behind a display of gardening tools. It was happening. Here. Her family wasn't just a ghost from her past. They were a creeping, invasive rot, spreading their tendrils even into this quiet corner of the world. They were targeting the very store that gave Jack one of his meager lifelines. She felt sick. She was a carrier of a disease, infecting this town without even knowing it. That evening, the world decided to tighten the screws. A call came from the school nurse. Emma had collapsed during gym class. A fever spike. Jack was at his pizza job, unreachable. They had called Alexandra as the emergency contact. She rushed to the school, her heart pounding. She found Emma pale and listless on a cot in the nurse's office. "It's her heart," the nurse explained, her face grim. "A congenital condition. Sarah, her mother had it too. It's manageable, but the treatments, they're expensive. Jack does his best, but the unspoken words hung in the air. He can't afford it. Alexandra held Emma's small, hot hand. This wasn't about a gifted program anymore. This was about a little girl's life, a life that could be saved with money, her kind of money. Later that night, after Jack had arrived, his face a mask of terror, they sat in the sterile quiet of the county hospital. The doctor was blunt. Emma needed a new medication, a specialized treatment protocol. The cost was astronomical. 5 figures. Jack seemed to shrink before her eyes, the weight of the world crushing him. "I'll get another job," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I'll sell the bike. I'll do whatever it takes." Alexandra looked at this good, proud man, willing to work himself into an early grave for his daughter. And she looked at the pristine, untouched platinum card in her wallet. She could solve this problem with a single phone call. She could wipe away his worry, secure Emma's future, fix everything. But it would be a lie, another layer in the fiction she had constructed. She thought of the hardware store, of the Kent Industries buyout. She thought of the doctor's bill. It was all connected. Her family created the problem, and she held the solution. It was a cruel, elegant trap, and she was standing right in the middle of it. That night, she went back to her apartment and opened the trunk. She pulled out the folder for the Stewart Manufacturing takedown. Then, she pulled out her laptop. She had been trained her entire life for this, to be ruthless, to be efficient, to use money and power as weapons. For the first time, she was going to use those skills not to destroy, but to save. She would become a ghost in the machine, a silent, anonymous benefactor. She would move money through untraceable channels, set up grants through shell foundations, and manipulate the system her father had built to serve her own ends. She would save Emma. She would save Jack's job. She would save Cedar Grove. But she would have to do it from the shadows, because if Jack ever found out, if he ever knew that the woman he was starting to fall for was the daughter of the man trying to ruin him, it wouldn't just break his pride, it would break his heart, and hers right along with it. The first miracle arrived via a certified letter. The Cedar Grove Community Fund, a sleepy local charity founded decades ago, announced a new, unexpected grant, the Margaret Kent Memorial Scholarship for Exceptional Children. It was a one-time award, funded by a mysterious, anonymous donor. It covered the full cost of Emma's medical treatments for the next 5 years. Jack wept when he read the letter, his shoulders shaking with a relief so profound it was almost painful. "Margaret Kent," he breathed, his voice thick with awe. "That was your grandmother's name." Alexandra, sitting across from him at his kitchen table, felt her heart twist. "She was a wonderful woman," she said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. The second miracle happened at the hardware store. Just as Mr. Henderson was about to reluctantly accept the lowball offer from the Kent Industries subsidiary, a competing bid arrived. It was from a small independent co-op of hardware stores from the next state over. Their offer was significantly higher, and it came with a guarantee to retain all current employees and increase their wages. The Kent Industries offer was dead in the water. Jack's job was safe. He came to her apartment that night, his eyes shining with a hope she hadn't seen before. "It's like the whole town is looking out for us," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Like someone's watching over us." "Someone is," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Their relationship deepened, nurtured by the false spring of these manufactured miracles. They fell into a comfortable rhythm of shared meals, late-night talks, and quiet moments watching Emma sleep. The space between them grew smaller, charged with an unspoken electricity. One snowy evening, after a school concert where Emma had sung a solo, her clear voice filling the auditorium, he walked her home. The town was quiet, draped in a blanket of white. Emma had gone ahead with Mrs. Chen, leaving them in a bubble of swirling snowflakes and silent expectation. He stopped under a street lamp, the golden light catching the snow in her hair. "I know there are things you're not telling me, Alexandra," he said, his voice low and serious, I know you have secrets, but whoever you were before you came here, it doesn't matter. What matters is who you are now." He reached out and brushed a snowflake from her cheek. His touch was electric. "And the person you are now, I think I'm falling in love with you." The last of her defenses crumbled. All the lies, all the secrets, all the fear, it all melted away in the warmth of his gaze. "I'm falling in love with you too, Jack," she whispered. The kiss was everything. It was gentle and tentative at first, then deep and hungry, a release of weeks of pent-up emotion. It was a promise of a future she had never dared to imagine. In the quiet, snowy street, wrapped in his arms, Alexandra felt truly, completely happy for the first time in her life. It was a perfect moment. And like all perfect things in her life, it was destined to be shattered. The next morning, she went to the library for her volunteer shift. She was still floating, the memory of Jack's kiss a warm ember in her chest. She found Jack there in the basement, fixing a leaking pipe. He had that look on his face again, the one of quiet determination, of a man who could fix anything. "Morning," he said, his smile making her heart skip a beat. "Mr. Henderson asked me to look at this old plumbing. Said the town's records might have the original schematics." He was pulling a dusty old box of town archives from a shelf. As he set it down, a sheaf of brittle, yellowed papers slipped out and scattered across the floor. "I'll get it," she said, kneeling down. She gathered the papers, old building permits, tax records, deeds, and then she saw it. An incorporation document from 1952. Kent Industries, Cedar Grove branch office. Her breath caught in her throat. "Find anything?" Jack asked from behind her. She stared at the document, her blood turning to ice. Her family hadn't just targeted the hardware store recently. They had been here before, decades ago. "Alexandra, what is it?" She couldn't speak. She could only point at the paper. At the signature at the bottom of the page, it was her grandfather's. But it was the line of business that made her stomach clench. It wasn't about hardware stores or real estate. It was a timber company, and the document was a permit to clear-cut 1,000 acres of old-growth forest just north of town. Jack took the paper from her trembling hand. He read it, his brow furrowed in confusion. Then his eyes widened in dawning horror. "The Miller Ridge Forest Fire," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It wasn't a lightning strike. My grandfather, he was the fire chief. He always said something wasn't right, that the fire moved too fast, burned too hot. It destroyed dozens of homes. It killed his best friend." He looked from the paper to her face, the pieces clicking into place with sickening speed. "Your family! They didn't just want to buy the hardware store. They did this." The silence in the dusty basement was absolute, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of the leaking pipe. The scholarship, the buyout offer for the store, it wasn't kindness, it was conscience money, guilt. "Jack," she began, her voice a strangled plea. "I didn't know, I swear." "Didn't you?" He shot back, his voice raw with betrayal. He held up the document. "Is this what your grandmother was paying for all those years? Was she trying to wash the blood off the family money? Is that what you're doing here? Trying to atone for the sins of your father, your grandfather?" Every word was a nail in the coffin of the life she had tried to build. "Are we just a project to you, Alexandra?" he asked, his eyes, the kind, gentle eyes she had fallen in love with, now filled with a pain so deep it stole her breath. "Are we your charity case? A way to make yourself feel better about the fact that your entire fortune is built on the ruins of towns like ours, on the graves of people like my grandfather's friend?" The library door at the top of the stairs creaked open. It was Mrs. Rodriguez, the librarian, and she wasn't alone. Standing beside her, immaculate in a tailored suit, was a man Alexandra had hoped to never see again, her brother Charles. "There you are, sister," Charles said, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. Father was getting worried, playing librarian in this charmingly rustic backwater. "It's a bit much, even for you." He glanced from Alexandra's stricken face to Jack's, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Oh," he said, feigning surprise. "Are we interrupting something?" The trap hadn't just been sprung. It had been waiting for her patiently for 50 years. Her family's sins were not a secret she could outrun. They were the very foundation of Cedar Grove's deepest tragedy, and she had just led the man she loved right to the heart of it. Jack looked at Charles, then back at Alexandra, his face a granite mask of betrayal. He dropped the old document at her feet. "Stay away from me," he said, his voice cold and dead. "Stay away from my daughter." He turned and walked up the stairs, brushing past her brother without a second glance. The sound of his footsteps echoing on the library's wooden floor was the sound of her world ending. Charles watched him go, then turned to Alexandra, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "Well, that was dramatic. Now stop playing peasant and come home. Father has bought the town council, the mayor, and your little handyman's hardware store. The deal is done. Cedar Grove officially belongs to Kent Industries now." He gestured around the dusty basement. All of it. Alexandra stood frozen in the wreckage of her life. It was worse than she could have ever imagined. She hadn't just lied to Jack. She was the living embodiment of the lie that had haunted his family for generations. Her love for him wasn't a bridge between their worlds. It was the final, devastating blow. "What do you want, Charles?" she asked, her voice hollow. "Want?" He laughed, a short, sharp bark. "We want you back, of course. But more than that, Father wants to teach this town a lesson about who's really in charge. He's demolishing the town square, all of it, the diner, the library, the hardware store. He's putting up a Kent Plaza, a monument to progress." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And he's putting your Jack Morrison in charge of the demolition crew. A poetic little touch, don't you think? Making him tear down his own life. The offer is on the table. A salary that would make his head spin. Full medical for his little girl for life. All he has to do is sign." The cruelty was breathtaking. It was a checkmate. A move so perfectly vicious, it had her father's signature all over it. They would force Jack to choose between his pride and his daughter's life. "He'll never do it," she whispered. "Won't he?" Charles smirked. "Everyone has a price, sister. You're the one who taught me that. Now the jet is waiting. Are you coming, or do you want to stay and watch the show?" Alexandra looked at the yellowed paper at her feet, the proof of her family's original sin. She thought of Jack's face, shattered by a betrayal that spanned generations. She thought of Emma, a little girl who believed in the magic of jazz and kindness. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "A legacy is the lives you've touched for the better." She had touched Jack's life, and she had utterly destroyed it. A cold, hard fury began to build in her chest, displacing the grief. It was a familiar feeling. It was the Kent anger, the ruthless efficiency her father had been so proud of. But for the first time, it wasn't aimed at a balance sheet or a competitor. It was aimed at her own family. "Tell Father I'll be at the town council meeting tonight," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "And tell him to bring his best offer. He's going to need it." She bent down and picked up the old document. It wasn't just evidence of a crime anymore. It was a weapon, and she finally knew how to use it. The town council chamber was a pressure cooker. The air was thick with fear and resentment. Alexandra slipped in through a side door, taking a seat in the back row, hidden in the shadows. Her father, Richard Kent, stood at the podium, a portrait of suave, predatory power. Charles stood beside him, a smug prince regent. Jack was in the front row. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. Beside him sat Mr. Henderson, his face ashen. The rest of the town, Betty from the diner, Mrs. Rodriguez, even Mrs. Chen, filled the benches, their faces a mixture of defiance and despair. "The Kent Plaza will be a beacon of prosperity," her father was saying, his voice resonating with false sincerity. "New jobs, new opportunities, a brighter future for Cedar Grove. And to lead this exciting new chapter, We need a man of the community. A man with integrity and roots here. Mr. Jack Morrison. All eyes turned to Jack. He didn't move. The management position comes with a generous compensation package, Charles added, his voice slick, and a comprehensive healthcare plan that will cover all of your daughter's needs. For life. It was a public execution. They were forcing him to sell his soul in front of his friends and neighbors. Jack stood up slowly. He didn't look at her father. He looked at the members of the town council. My grandfather helped build half the buildings on this square, he said, his voice steady, though Alexandra could see his hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists. My father taught me how to fix them. I've swept their floors and stocked their shelves. They're not just buildings. They're our memories. They're our home. He turned to face Richard Kent. My daughter's life is not for sale, and neither is my town. You can keep your offer. A wave of murmurs and scattered applause rippled through the room. Richard Kent's smile didn't falter. He had expected this. This was part of the game. A noble sentiment, Mr. Morrison, he said condescendingly. But sentiment doesn't pay doctors' bills, and it doesn't stop the bulldozers. The contracts are signed. The permits are approved. This project is happening, with or without you. That was her cue. Alexandra stood up. No, it's not. Every head in the room swiveled towards her. She saw Jack's eyes widen in shock. She saw the flash of fury on her father's face. She walked to the front of the room, the old yellow document in her hand. She didn't stand next to Jack. She stood directly in front of her father, blocking his view of the room. This is a permit from 1952, she announced, her voice ringing with a clarity and power she didn't know she possessed. It's a permit for Kent Industries to clear-cut the Miller Ridge Forest, a project that was abandoned after a mysterious fire destroyed the very land you had just acquired, a fire that the then chief of the fire department suspected was arson, a fire that cost a man his life. She let the words hang in the air. I believe the statute of limitations on wrongful death and insurance fraud is quite long. I'm sure the state attorney's office would be very interested in seeing this document, as would the press. Charles took a step forward. This is ridiculous. You have no proof. Don't I? Alexandra looked past him, her eyes finding Mrs. Chen in the crowd. The old woman gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. My grandmother, Margaret Kent, kept meticulous records, diaries, ledgers. She knew what her husband did. She knew what this company was built on. And she spent the rest of her life trying to make it right. She turned to her father. She also made a provision in her will. A little surprise for you, father. She knew you'd come for this town eventually. She always said you couldn't stand to see anything pure exist without owning it. She smiled, a cold, sharp smile that was all Kent. If Kent Industries ever made a hostile move against the township of Cedar Grove, a controlling interest of her personal shares, the shares you thought you inherited, are to be immediately transferred into a trust to be managed by the Cedar Grove Town Council. The room erupted. Her father's face went from crimson to stark white. He had been outmaneuvered, not by her, but by his own mother, from beyond the grave. Checkmate, Alexandra said softly. But she wasn't finished. She turned to the council. I am also, as of this moment, relinquishing my own shares in Kent Industries. All of them. I'm transferring them to a fund for the former employees of Stewart Manufacturing in Vermont so they can buy back their own factory. She looked at Jack, her heart in her eyes. I can't change what my family did. I can't erase the lies. But I can choose what I do now. And I choose this town. I choose the man who taught his daughter that kindness matters more than anything. The man who offered his most prized possession to a stranger just because she needed help. She took a deep breath. Cedar Grove is not for sale. It never was. Her father stared at her, his empire crumbling around him, defeated by the two women in his life he had underestimated the most. He turned, without a word, and stalked out of the room, Charles scurrying behind him like a chastened dog. The chamber was silent for a beat, and then it exploded into cheers. People were on their feet, hugging, crying. Betty was leading a chant of Cedar Grove, Cedar Grove. But Alexandra only had eyes for Jack. He was looking at her, not with anger or betrayal, but with a dawning sense of wonder. He took a step towards her, then another. He stopped right in front of her. The entire town watched, holding its breath. "My wife, Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She left me something, a ring. She told me to keep it safe, and that one day I'd know who to give it to." He reached into his pocket. "She said I'd know it was the right person because she would be stronger than she looked, smarter than anyone gave her credit for, and that she would fight for the people she loved, no matter the cost." He knelt, right there in the middle of the town council chamber. "Alexandra," he said, his eyes shining with tears, "you're not a Kent. You're a Morrison, if you'll have me." Tears streamed down Alexandra's face as she looked at the simple, beautiful ring, at the face of the man she loved, at the town that had become her home. This was real wealth. This was a real legacy. "Yes," she whispered, the sound lost in the roar of the crowd. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." Spring arrived in Cedar Grove that year, not just as a season, but as a promise fulfilled. The Kent Plaza was never built. Instead, the town square was revitalized by the community itself, funded by the newly empowered Margaret Kent Trust. The hardware store thrived, co-owned now by Jack Morrison and Mr. Henderson. Alexandra's garden became the heart of the town. It was a riot of color and life, full of experimental plots where Emma and her friends from the new, expanded school science club tested their theories on jazz-loving beans. One sunny Saturday afternoon, the whole town seemed to be there. Mrs. Chen was serving dumplings, Betty was pouring coffee, and Mrs. Rodriguez was helping Emma graph the growth rate of a particularly enthusiastic cucumber plant. Jack came and stood beside Alexandra, his arm wrapping easily around her waist. They were a unit now, a family. The wedding was planned for June, a simple ceremony in the garden. "Did you see this?" Jack asked, holding up his phone. It was a news article. Stewart Manufacturing reopens under employee ownership. A picture showed smiling workers standing in front of the factory they now owned. "Some legacies are worth more than money," Alexandra said, leaning her head on his shoulder. Emma ran up to them, her face smudged with dirt and glowing with excitement. "Alexandra, Dad, look!" She pointed to a tiny green sprout pushing its way through the earth in a forgotten corner of the garden. "It's growing, even where we didn't plant anything." Alexandra knelt beside her daughter-to-be, her heart full. She looked at Jack, at Emma, at the faces of the friends who had become her family. She had come to Cedar Grove to escape, to hide. She had been a ghost, running from a name and a fortune that felt like a curse. But in this small town, surrounded by ordinary, extraordinary people, she had found something she never knew she was looking for. She had found herself, and she was finally, completely, home. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales of unexpected twists and the power of community. And let us know in the comments below. What do you think is the true measure of a person's wealth?